My name's Daniel. I'm 34, and I run a small but successful software business from home. I've always been more introverted, the kind of guy who prefers a quiet dinner and a good book over parties or big gatherings. My wife, Megan, is the opposite, charismatic, loud, the life of the room. And to be fair, that contrast worked for us. Most of the time. But the one thing we never saw eye to eye on was her mother, Sandra. If I had to describe Sandra in one word, it would be overbearing. The kind of woman who insists her opinion isn't just right, it's divine truth. If you challenge her, she doesn't argue. She gaslights, passive-aggressively, with a smile. And somehow, she always managed to insert herself into places she wasn't invited. Like our home, or our decisions, or, as I recently discovered, our $50,000 vacation. I'd been planning that trip for over a year. Bora Bora, a once-in-a-lifetime, turquoise ocean, over-water bungalow, everything taken care of dream. I'd been saving quietly, coordinating with travel agents, even checking dietary restrictions for everyone in the family, Megan, our two kids, and yes, Sandra, because Megan insisted she come. She hasn't been anywhere in years, she'd said. I bit my tongue. Fine. I could tolerate her for 10 days if it meant giving my family a beautiful memory. I told myself she'd behave. After all, I was footing the bill. Every penny. Fast forward to 3 days before the trip. I was in the kitchen sorting last-minute logistics when I overheard a phone call Megan had left on speaker. It was her mom, going on about how she couldn't wait to see Tom again. My stomach dropped. Tom was Megan's ex, her college boyfriend. The guy who, for some reason, Sandra still followed on Facebook and referred to as such a catch. I walked into the room slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. Why is she talking about Tom? Megan looked startled for a second, then tried to wave it off. Oh, she just means she's invited him to dinner when we're back. No big deal. It was a lie. I could tell instantly. Megan gets a slight tremor in her voice when she lies. Barely noticeable, unless you've spent a decade memorizing every syllable she speaks. I said nothing at the time. I didn't push it, but something in my gut told me to check the guest list with the travel agency. I still remember how my hands shook when the agent confirmed the passenger list. Thomas E. Colton, booked on the same flight, same bungalow cluster, paid by Sandra Miller, she said, but linked under your reservation. My vision tunneled. This woman had invited my wife's ex-boyfriend on the family vacation I paid for, without telling me, and somehow convinced herself it was totally fine. I didn't confront anyone right away. I needed time to think, to plan. I didn't want to explode and become the irrational husband. I needed leverage. So I started watching, listening, and what I found out made my blood boil. Sandra hadn't just invited Tom. She had arranged for him to stay in the bungalow next to ours. She'd told Megan it was a little surprise. Megan, for her part, claimed she was furious when she found out. She even tried to have it canceled, but apparently Sandra had already paid a chunk of it herself. Still, I wasn't convinced. Because Megan didn't tell me. She never mentioned any of it. Not until I found out on my own. I kept playing it cool. I smiled at the dinner table. I continued packing as if nothing had changed. Megan kept asking if I was excited. Totally, I'd say with a grin. Can't wait to make memories. Meanwhile, I quietly began unraveling everything behind the scenes. First, I contacted the travel agency and had my portion of the payment reversed. I told them there was an emergency and that I was withdrawing my family's reservation. I didn't cancel the trip outright. No, I left the bookings intact. I just redirected my funds elsewhere. Next, I made private reservations for me and the kids. Somewhere completely different. Somewhere peaceful, without Sandra, without drama. I didn't tell anyone. Not Megan, not the kids, not even my best friend. I wanted the silence to sting. Then, the night before departure, it happened. We were sitting in the living room with luggage lined by the front door. Sandra was there early, of course. She sipped her tea and looked around with that smug smile she always wore when she thought she was getting her way. Then she turned to me and said it like it was the most casual thing in the world. I thought it'd be nice to invite Tom, for old time's sake. He was such a big part of Megan's life. I figured the kids would enjoy meeting him too. I stared at her for a long second. Megan didn't meet my eyes. My son looked up from his tablet, and my daughter froze mid-step. I smiled. Oh, totally, I said softly. I'm all for surprises. I let the silence drag out. I watched as the smile on Sandra's face faltered just a little. Megan looked confused, but I could see the guilt building. I excused myself, walked into the bedroom, and took a photo of the new reservation details. Sent it to my email. Then I closed the app, walked back out, and sat beside my kids. That night, I tucked them in and kissed them both goodnight. I whispered, "We're going to have an adventure tomorrow, just the three of us." My daughter blinked. "What about mommy?" I smiled and said, "She's got a different kind of trip planned." Megan and Sandra stayed up late that night, laughing, sipping wine. At one point, I heard Sandra say, "Tom is going to flip when he sees Megan in a bikini." I stopped listening after that. I didn't want to hear any more. At exactly 5:15 a.m., I slipped out of bed, packed my bag, and gently woke the kids. I left a letter taped to the bathroom mirror, addressed to Megan. No yelling, no accusations, just the truth, laid out plainly. And a reminder, when you let someone else invite ghosts into your marriage, don't be surprised when the living walk away. And as we boarded our early flight to the Maldives, with the sun rising behind us, I took one last look at my phone and turned it off completely. Whatever chaos was coming next, they could face it without me. The flight to the Maldives was quiet at first. The kids were still half asleep, tucked into the window and middle seats with their neck pillows and headphones on. I sat in the aisle seat, watching the clouds blur beneath us, trying to calm the storm in my chest. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the screaming, throwing things way I'd expected. It was more like a slow, steady burn. Controlled. Measured. I wasn't out for revenge in the cartoon villain sense. I wasn't trying to ruin lives. I just didn't want to be treated like a fool anymore. Or worse, like I didn't matter in my own marriage. I kept thinking back to all the little red flags over the years that I'd brushed off. How Sandra would always bring up Tom at family dinners. How Megan never corrected her. How she still had old photos of them in her mother's hallway, despite being married to me for almost a decade. Megan used to laugh it off, say, "It's just mom being weird. Don't take it personally." And I didn't. For years, I swallowed my discomfort, bit my tongue when Sandra made passive comments like, "Tom always helped with the dishes," or "Tom would have loved this vacation spot." I told myself she was just stuck in the past, that Megan loved me, that we were solid. But now, staring at my sleeping kids with my whole life back in flux, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been blind, or maybe too forgiving, and I wasn't going to keep paying for it, financially or emotionally. When we landed in Malé, the kids perked up. The resort had sent a private boat for us, and the moment we stepped on, my daughter's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. The water was the clearest shade of blue I'd ever seen. I had picked the Maldives not just because it was beautiful, but because it was far, isolated, untouchable, the kind of place where the outside world feels like a rumor. By the time we reached the bungalow, ours, with no unwanted guests in the next room, I felt something strange I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. No drama. No tension. Just the sound of waves and my kids giggling as they ran through the rooms trying to claim beds. It was day 2 when the messages started. I had turned my phone on briefly to check in with work through Wi-Fi. I hadn't planned on reading anything else, but curiosity got the better of me. The family group chat had exploded. Over 50 missed messages. The first one was from Megan. "Daniel, what's going on? The hotel says the reservation was canceled. Tom is here. My mom is freaking out." The next few were a mix of panic and confusion. Sandra sent a voice note that I didn't bother opening. Then another from Megan. "Please tell me you didn't actually leave. This is insane. You're acting like a child." I nearly laughed at that one. Childish. After what they pulled. Then came the part that made my stomach twist a little. "Where are the kids? Did you seriously take them without telling me? This is not okay, Daniel." I sighed, staring at the message. I wasn't proud of cutting Megan off so sharply. I didn't want to play dirty. But I also knew this wasn't just about the trip. This was about trust. And right now, she had none left in the bank. I wrote one sentence back. "They're safe. I'll explain everything when I'm ready." And then I turned the phone off again. Back in Bora Bora, from what I later heard through mutual friends and family, the fallout had been brutal. Turns out, Sandra hadn't just invited Tom. She had booked his room with my money. Or thought she had. Once I canceled everything under my name, her card didn't cover the difference. The hotel refused to check them in without full payment. Tom, apparently, had assumed this was some kind of group reunion and showed up expecting a warm welcome. only to find a furious Megan and a hysterical Sandra arguing at the front desk. The airline wouldn't refund their tickets. The resort charged a cancellation fee Sandra hadn't read about. And Tom, he booked a flight home that same night after a heated shouting match where Megan called him a walking midlife crisis. The cherry on top? The Instagram photos. Megan had posted a story with the caption, "Dream trip ruined. Thanks, Mom." And Sandra? She went quiet. No quotes about Tom. No cryptic Facebook posts. Just radio silence. Meanwhile, in the Maldives, I spent the days doing everything I imagined that trip was supposed to be. Swimming with my kids, eating fresh seafood on the beach, falling asleep in hammocks, laughing at corny movies with them in bed. It wasn't perfect, nothing is, but it was peaceful, honest, free from all the noise. On the fifth day, Megan finally found a way to reach me through the hotel. The front desk handed me a message at breakfast. Just 5 words, written in Megan's unmistakable handwriting. "Please don't give up on us." I stared at the note for a long time. I didn't know yet if I wanted a divorce, or if I just needed distance. But what I did know was this. The moment Sandra brought Tom into that vacation, she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. And Megan, by staying silent, had let her do it, whether she meant to or not. I looked over at my kids building a sandcastle with a local guide. They were laughing, truly laughing. And for once, I wasn't in the background of my own family story. I was right there, present, in the middle of it all. That was the moment I realized something had shifted in me. And back home, that shift was about to send shockwaves. When we flew home 4 days later, I didn't tell anyone we were returning early. Our flight was discreet, a red-eye that landed at 3:40 a.m. I'd arranged for a car to take us straight home, not our house, but a short-term rental I'd booked quietly before the trip. It was a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, nestled near a lake with tall trees surrounding it. Peaceful, private, safe. I wasn't trying to run from my marriage. Not yet, anyway. But I also wasn't walking blindly back into the same house, with the same problems, just because the vacation had ended. Megan had crossed a line. Maybe she hadn't physically invited Tom, but she'd allowed it, enabled it, hid it, and most of all, she hadn't stopped it. If the roles were reversed, if I'd let an ex of mine slide into a $50,000 trip and kept it quiet, I already knew how that conversation would have gone. It wouldn't have been calm. I messaged her that morning once we settled into the rental. "We're back. The kids are fine. I'll bring them by the house this weekend." She replied almost instantly. "You can't just take off like this. We need to talk. Please." I didn't know Mom invited him until the last minute. I didn't respond. Not yet. That Friday, I did stop by the house, but not alone. I brought my brother, Eric. He's a lawyer. A quiet guy, calm as a glacier, but sharp. He didn't say much when we walked in, but his presence was enough to keep Sandra quiet. Oh yeah, Sandra was there, sitting in the living room like she owned the place, sipping a latte and flipping through a home decor magazine like nothing had happened. Megan stood near the fireplace, arms folded, eyes puffy and tired. She reached for me when I walked in. "Daniel, please, can we talk?" I motioned toward the kitchen. "Alone?" Sandra scoffed behind me. "If you're going to accuse my daughter of something, I deserve to be present." I cut her off without turning around. "No, you don't." We stepped into the kitchen. Megan looked like she hadn't slept since Bora Bora. Her voice trembled. "I didn't plan any of this. I didn't even know Tom was coming until the day before we left. My mom thought it would be nice," I said coldly. "For old time's sake." She looked away. "I found out before you did. And instead of telling me, you kept quiet. That's what really matters, Megan. You had a moment to stand up for us, for me, and you didn't." She bit her lip, eyes glassy. I didn't want to ruin the trip. I thought maybe she'd cancel it. She told me she paid for it. She paid for part of my trip, using my itinerary, then made herself host. You knew it was wrong. You just didn't want to have the fight. That silence hung heavy between us. Not angry, just sad, tired. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "Maybe you don't," I said. I walked out of the kitchen. Sandra looked up, ready to pounce with some snide remark. But Eric stood up at the same time and pulled a folder from his bag. That shut her up. "I'll be taking the kids for the weekend," I said, flatly. "They're staying with me. We're figuring things out." Slowly. Megan didn't argue. She just nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Later that night, After I'd tucked the kids into their beds in the rental and sat on the porch watching the moon ripple across the lake, I finally opened the envelope Eric had left with me. Inside were the early drafts of a separation agreement. Not divorce, just space, boundaries, structure, and, most importantly, protection of my financial assets. I hadn't made up my mind yet, but I wanted options. I wanted clarity. The next few days were quiet. No drama. No texts from Sandra. No surprise visits. Just slow mornings with pancakes and cartoons, long walks by the lake, and conversations with my kids that reminded me what it felt like to actually be a father, not just a bank account. On the following Monday, I got a call from Megan. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I told my mom she's not welcome in our house anymore, she said. Her voice was low, almost ashamed. I should have done it years ago, but I didn't want to make things harder. I was scared of the backlash. I didn't say anything. I told her I want to fix this, but I know I need to prove I mean it. So, I canceled her keys. Changed the code. I'm cutting her off financially. She's furious. Said I'm ungrateful. But I don't care anymore. There was a long pause. I want us back, Daniel. Not like before. Better than before. I leaned back in the wooden chair, watching the pine trees sway gently in the breeze. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't know if forgiveness was something I was ready to give. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as the wind moved softly through the leaves, I realized something else. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like space. Real, honest space. The kind that maybe, just maybe, could grow into something new. Something stronger. Or something separate. That choice was still mine. I didn't answer Megan right away. Not on that call. Not for the rest of that day. I sat with it. Let the words hang there. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about making sure I wasn't rushing into forgiveness out of guilt or fear or loneliness. I'd spent years brushing things aside, apologizing for feelings I was told were too sensitive, tolerating her mother's constant intrusions, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight, that being the bigger person meant keeping the peace. But peace built on silence is just pressure. Eventually, it explodes. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I walked the length of the small dock behind the lake house, sat on the edge, and let my feet dangle over the water. I stared at my reflection in the rippling surface and asked myself the real question. Do I still trust her? Not love. Love is easy, familiar, soft around the edges. But trust is a structure. When it's cracked, everything above it becomes unstable. Could I rebuild it with her? Or had the foundation already eroded past the point of no return? The next morning, I called her back. We'll meet, I said. Tomorrow. Just us. Public place. Neutral ground. I chose a quiet cafe near the edge of town, not far from where we'd had our first real date. Back when things were simple. Before marriage, before kids, before Sandra started treating our relationship like an audition for her fantasy family reboot. Megan showed up right on time. She looked worn down, emotionally stripped. No makeup, no dramatic gestures. Just her. She sat across from me, and for the first time in weeks, we really looked at each other. I know what I did, she said softly. Or didn't do, rather. I know I didn't stand up for you. I know how much that hurt. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. I let my mother treat you like a second-class citizen in our own life. And I didn't protect you from her because I was too scared of losing her approval. I didn't think she'd ever respect boundaries, so I stopped trying. But I didn't realize until recently that, in doing that, I made you feel like you didn't matter. And that's the worst thing I've ever done. There were tears in her eyes now, but she didn't sob, didn't make it about her. She just let the silence fill the space between us. I've already talked to a therapist, she continued. I've been going twice a week. I'm working on my own boundaries, how I let people bulldoze me, how I pass that damage on to you. I know it doesn't fix everything. I don't expect you to forgive me today or this year, but I want to fix this. I want to earn your trust again, even if it takes the rest of my life. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it right. You didn't just let your mom disrespect me, I said. You made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. I needed a partner, not someone who'd flinch every time her mother raised her voice. I know, she said, and to her credit, she didn't flinch now. And when she invited Tom, whether you meant to or not, you chose silence over me. That was your moment, Megan. That was the one. You could have stopped it all. I wish I had, she whispered. Every day. I took a breath and leaned back in my chair. I'm not coming home. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But I'm willing to keep meeting. To talk. To co-parent. To see where this leads. But it's not for you to fix, Megan. You need to rebuild your own boundaries before you can help rebuild ours. She nodded slowly. I understand. We finished our coffee without another word. It wasn't cold. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. Maybe for the first time in years. Over the next 3 months, things moved slowly. Deliberately. Megan stayed in therapy. Sandra tried calling a dozen times, sent guilt-tripping emails full of "after all I've done for you" nonsense. Megan blocked her, changed the locks, even returned a check Sandra sent for the kids' birthdays with a note that simply read, "We're building something new. Please respect our space." It was the first time I saw her draw a hard line. We kept meeting once a week, sometimes more. Sometimes with the kids, sometimes just us. We talked about everything, not just the trip or Sandra or Tom, but the small things we'd stopped sharing. What we were afraid of, what we wanted, what we missed. At first, I was distant, careful. I had one foot out the door emotionally. But then, something strange started happening. The wall I'd built to protect myself didn't crumble. It shifted, became a window. 6 months after the disaster in Bora Bora, we went on another trip. Not Bora Bora, not the Maldives. A small cabin in the woods, 2 hours away, just the four of us. No phones, no social media, no outsiders. Just silence, board games, home-cooked meals, and conversations by the fire. We laughed. A lot. My daughter fell asleep on my chest every night. My son started calling me Captain Dad, again, a nickname he'd stopped using months ago. And Megan? She didn't ask for forgiveness. She showed it. In the way she listened. In the way she didn't flinch at confrontation. In the way she didn't avoid her mother's name, but refused to let it dominate the air. When we returned, I moved back in. Not as a reward. Not as a reset. But as a decision. A choice. And here's the thing. Life didn't magically go back to the way it was. Because it shouldn't. The old version of us wasn't sustainable. We didn't need to go back. We needed to evolve. Sandra tried to reach out once more, this time through a family friend who emailed me a long-winded apology on her behalf. I didn't reply. Megan didn't either. We kept the door shut. That wasn't revenge. That was peace. As for Tom, I don't know where he is. I don't care. He was never the threat. He was just the final straw. A symbol of everything Megan and I hadn't addressed. He walked into our marriage like a ghost summoned by a woman who didn't know how to let go of the past. But we did. We let it go. Bit by bit. Day by day. And now, when I wake up and see my kids barreling into our room with messy hair and sleepy grins, I don't feel like the man who paid for a vacation that turned into a betrayal. I feel like a man who walked through fire, with everything to lose, and still found his way home. Not to the same house, but to a better one.